My foray into environmentalism is an all too familiar story for many people. It came from witnessing a thriving wild place that I loved, completely desecrated. In an age of climate change and biodiversity loss, greenwashing and anti-protest laws marring our democracy, something fundamental in society must urgently shift if we are to collectively prevent further destruction of our planet. Is it beyond the realms of possibility to both prevent destruction and begin restoring nature? Maybe that's being too optimistic, but in a world precariously on the edge of ecological collapse, hope is the greatest power that we have. Especially for the younger generation, who have been robbed of so much of the natural world. Many places are today far from the flourishing wild gems that they once were.
There was a national park out there, but I can't remember exactly where it was. But at least it wasn't of substantial significance in the scheme of things.
For my lifetime, the place called Lake Pedder is an auxiliary hydroelectric storage impoundment that feeds the neighbouring Lake Gordon and its power station. It was created in 1972 by flooding one of the natural wonders of the world, the real Lake Pedder. The controversy sparked national outcry and criticism from around the world. There was even a suspected murder. The new enlarged Pedder was pitched to Tasmanians as a tourism asset that was more accessible and offered greater recreational opportunities than the original lake. The impoundment's contribution to the hydro scheme was then limited, with special legislation permitting only the top 1.53 metres of water fluctuation to be used to protect the aesthetic values of the new lake. Prior to 2020, in the global tourism boom, the road to the impoundment was the only location in Tasmania that didn't see a substantial increase in visitation. Introduced trout outcompeted endemic species and sent them to extinction in their natural habitat. Trout fishing competitions have declined as the invasive fish population is overstocked to the point where the fish have no capacity to grow larger due to a lack of food and space. So the tourists didn't come, and the water contribution for power remains restricted. But some good did come from Lake Pedder's flooding. The world's first green values political party was formed. When the Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area was declared, the impoundment was included in the boundaries, with the intent that the original would eventually be restored. And testament to the power of hope. The infectious and enduring optimism from the original Pedder people, combined with the urgent need to repair nature, has inspired a new generation to join the campaign to see that Lake Pedder is restored.
It was the heart of the southwest wilderness. And this lake up in the mountains in Western Tasmania with its magnificent panorama, its views, its wildness. So I got involved. I came to Tasmania to look for the Tasmanian tiger and to see Lake Pedder. Well, I didn't get the first, but I did get the second, and it fired me up. I took a light plane flight over Lake Pedder on this glorious day, and there was the lake with that magnificent beach. It's imprinted in my mind forever.
It's hard to describe Lake Pedder. It's a very powerful place. It's always changing. There's sunshine in the roaring 40s, and then the squall would pass by, these, heavy rain showers, and then out would come beams of light and rainbows and sunshine. And as a child, we could roam very freely on that beach and into the warm waters of the lake. So it was part of my foundation.
I'm fortunate enough to go there just before it was drowned. When I first arrived in Tasmania.
What was that like?
It was a bizarre experience because I walked for 2 hours across a buttongrass plain, which wasn't very pleasant. I'd never done that before, and then came out on this absolutely amazing beach with planes landing right and left and people running up and down, and this incredible burgundy water stretching black to the horizon. And it was a nice day, and the mountains stood up, craggly and snaggle-toothed in the background. So, I just wish that I could have been there before it was the last chance sort of thing, and everyone was there to soak in the spirituality of it all.
I was at university in 1972 here in Hobart when the campaign to save Lake Pedder was at its height. I just couldn't believe at the time that anyone would go ahead with flooding that lake. And when they did, there was a whole generation of us who lost faith in the political process at that time, and we were the ones who then fronted up and were arrested on the Franklin.
Well, after Lake Pedder, of course, the Hydroelectric Commission was rampant, and they flooded the grandest rafting river in southern Tasmania, the Pieman, and they were coming for the Franklin. And I thought, this can't happen again. And I felt obligated to people like Brenda Heen and Dick Jones and Clive Sansom, Kevin Kiernan. Without the Pedder campaigners, we'd have lost the Franklin too.
The Pedder campaign spawned a Pedder family, or a Pedder community, if you like, of people for whom the place was immensely important. And they included bushwalkers who went there, people who never went there, but just rejoiced in the fact that such beauty could exist in the world. Artists, photographers. It was a joy to be down on the beach with these people, Truchanas and Ralph Hope Johnson and Elspeth Thorne and Max Angus. And also with, in some cases, their family members. And some of those family members are now sort of part of the restoration campaign, because once Pedder gets in your soul, it doesn't let go. And neither will we. But it's beyond that now. There are so many people who can look back at the images that have been captured of Lake Pedder, who appreciate its role in the evolution of environmental consciousness in the country.
I don't know how old I was when I found out about the original Lake Pedder and what happened, but I do remember my dad, he's got one of those wonderful Truchanas books, and I remember sort of sitting on the couch with Dad, hearing stories about and reflecting on the beautiful images in this book and how it had stirred such emotion.
Now, Truchanas, of course, was a wilderness photographer, and so it was his slideshow that really helped people to campaign.
Did you see that presentation?
Oh yes,
Do you recall it?
We had the task of colouring in all the posters. We were part of the campaign. So yes, the Lake Pedder audiovisual is a very special work that Truchanas created with his wonderful photographer friend Ralph Hope Johnson. And initially there was a bit of fear, would this be well received? But it was so well received, it sold out every time. I think there was sort of 8 or 10 presentations, and it certainly evoked a strong response from the Tasmanian community.
Even without viewing an artwork, or before you've heard the full story of Lake Pedder, there is something eerie about the vast inland sea of the impoundment imposing on the southwest wilderness.
Pedder was always this sort of mystical but sad place. It's always had this sense for me of the attempt to thwart, the evils of modernisation and so-called progress. So it was always this place I really didn't want to go because I'd never seen it as it was and should be. Yeah, it's dead. It's dead. It's dead water. Pedder is interesting because it kind of avoided being renamed with an Aboriginal language name when so much else was during the whole kind of epic height of hydroelectric scheme fervour. You know, all the Poatina, Wayatina. They've been drawn from Aboriginal language word lists compiled by colonists. For me, it's like a double obscenity, you know, to desecrate our country and then put inappropriate Aboriginal names as though they are place names, like Poatina, but it's about tears or water or, you know, misty this or that. So it's kind of pretending everything is okay and appropriate by bestowing an Aboriginal language word on a place.
There's always a deep sadness knowing that our lake is submerged under an impoundment which we still believe to this day should never have happened. So there is an ongoing grieving and also a resolve around the importance of draining the impoundment and restoring the lake.
People say, look, it'd be fantastic to restore Lake Pedder, but, you know, we have so many campaigns on the go. We're trying to protect the forests. We are trying to close down coal mines and stop new ones opening. At least Lake Pedder under the impoundment is safe where it is. And so that's been one of the reasons why people kind of park the campaign and say we've got other things to do. But now there is a degree of urgency.
In 2017, the Tasmanian Auditor-General found that 2 of the dams impounding Pedder were high risk. The Edgar and the Scotts Peak Dam were built adjacent to the Edgar fault line. Consequently, both dams, which are within the World Heritage Area, have been earmarked for contemporary safety upgrades at a cost to the public of well over $100 million.
Not only are you going to take 2,000 truckloads of rocks into the area to rebuild the Edgar Dam, the whole area will have to be expanded for a turning circle for these major trucks. It is a huge logistical exercise, and that is just for the Edgar Dam. The smaller of the 2 dams, Scotts Peak, will be even more disruption.
When the Pedder scheme was first being proposed, it was essentially done in offices with engineers and politicians sweeping their arms over maps with grandiose scheme to build this 2 giant lakes. And the whole thing went through the Parliament without adequate geological investigation. You've got 2 situations then, a dam astride a fault, and you've got this dam that's built with not very satisfactory materials. Over at Scotts Peak, we've got slumping and leakage problems that have been going since 1975 at least. So they investigated several sites trying to find adequate rockfill with which to construct the dam. And after drilling at various places, they found some not terribly good argillite, and it's recorded in one of their reports as being the worst quality rockfill they ever used on any dam at the time. Now the fault they knew about, but we don't have a very long record of seismicity in this state or in this country for that matter. You know, we've got to think geological timeframes, not human timeframes. And so at the time the dam was constructed, people talked about the fault. Hydro gave assurances, look, it's fine, no problems, it's built to the standard necessary. The most recent data, however, suggests that over the last 61,000 years, and that might seem a long time, but let's come back to it, there's been 3 events of up to magnitude 7. This is really substantial. That was certainly not factored into the original construction. Would the dam fall over if it went off? I've got my doubts that it'd actually fall over, but I don't think it'd be a very healthy little cornflake if that happened. I've said it's only 3 times in 61,000 years, and that's of no consequence to anybody. unless you happen to be there the day it goes off.
There are downstream communities that would be affected if the dam burst. If liquefaction occurred and the water just went rushing down the Huon River, you've got Huonville, you've got Franklin, you've got all the communities out to the sea. Those communities have no idea that they are downstream of a dam which is high risk.
As a resident of the Huon Valley, I've struggled to understand the secrecy in relation to flood mapping should the dams fail, and all of the residents of the Huon Valley, how they're going to be affected, and the economy of the Huon Valley, and why this information hasn't been presented, and why transparency isn't at the forefront of Hydro and the Council's mind.
When requested to release the risk assessments and emergency flood mapping, the response received was that the full risk and inundation modelling was only released to emergency services and not the community in order to avoid panic.
In effect, it seems to me that a decision to rejig those dams is pretty much like deciding to flood Lake Pedder all over again. But this time, not without the innocent cloak of ignorance and lack of environmental awareness of the old days, but in full knowledge of all the values and all the strife.
We're not engineers, but we don't have to be to know that dams don't last forever. And there is a foolproof alternative here that mitigates any risk of dam failure. Remove the dams.
In Australia, there is no history of pulling down dams, whereas in the United States, 1,000 or more dams have been pulled down since 2000, and there is an awareness around the world of the danger being posed by ageing dams.
Dams are great. They conserve water, don't they? Well, yeah, to some extent they conserve water. To a great extent they conserve water, although it should be borne in mind that with the greater surface area of that water, there's a much higher evaporation rate, so just maybe there's less water in the landscape in the end than there was in the first place. There's a lot of negatives as well that we're not told about. They're including methane production from all the organic materials decomposing on the lake floor, the fact that conversion of CO2 into oxygen that the forests now flooded would otherwise have done, and all the environmental effects both within the storage perimeter and downstream of it. In terms of energy, I reckon there's a lot of scope for us to actually pursue healthy energy, not just a very constrained set of options put up by people who usually have a finger in the pie of the outcome.
Some people say, oh, but Lake Pedder is a storage lake to Lake Gordon and that hydro system, and you couldn't possibly pull down a storage lake to a hydro system in an age of global boiling. Well, I agree we have an age of global boiling, but I don't agree that you would continue to destroy an ecosystem when you've got an opportunity to restore it for a mere 57 megawatts of energy, because on average the Lake Pedder storage only provides that 57 megawatts into the Tasmanian energy grid. That can easily be replaced with an energy efficiency program, with rooftop solar or wind. And as an example of that, Cattle Hill and Granville Harbour, two new wind farms in Tasmania, produce a third more than Lake Pedder.
I think there are solutions, and the problem that isn't mentioned much is that it's going to be immensely expensive to restore the actual dams to maintain the drowning of Lake Pedder. I mean, why are we doing it? It's a tiny little bit of power. It's going to be probably twice as expensive as they say it's going to be to make those dams safe and secure and sound for the next 40 years. Yeah. So, yeah.
Perhaps we should have started with this line of inquiry. But here we finally are, visiting Professor Kirkpatrick to answer the most fundamental question of all.
Is it possible to restore Lake Pedder?
It's definitely possible to restore Lake Pedder, and feasible and desirable as well.
How long do you think it would take from when the impoundment was dewatered until there was just some primary revegetation starting to appear?
Well, judging from the apron of the adjacent Lake Gordon, it happens really quickly, just within years. Seeing that the peat's mostly there, and if you lower the water slowly, you're not going to wash away the peat. It'll happen really quickly because you get things like marchantias coming in and covering it to start off with and holding it together. And then you get the other things coming in. The only intervention really is needed is to get things in that haven't got a surviving seed store and aren't dispersed by birds or wind.
The erosion around the perimeter that's referred to as the bathtub ring.
Yes.
Is that going to be a permanent scar in the landscape when Pedder's restored?
No. There's, in some situations it might take longer than others to revegetate, but on the slopes the peat moves, which is the accumulation of vegetable matter, moves slowly down the slopes, so it obscure the ring very, very soon. Now, some places they've scraped it off to make false beaches, but they disappear as soon as you get cover of vegetation and it starts to build up peat again. And what I'd think would be good to do would be to scatter seed all over the area as it drains, so you get lots of shrubs re-establishing and get it going again.
Just imagine if you restored that peatland, the 240 square kilometres, and you not only had the store of carbon, but it was actually drawing down carbon.
It's also important to remember the Serpentine Valley and the Serpentine River, which gets overshadowed by the lake quite a bit, and how important that is ecologically and specifically for habitat for animals such as the platypus.
Pedder itself, the landform complex of Pedder, is totally intact for all intents and purposes. The amount of sediment that accumulated is absolutely minimal. The work that was done some years back by Peter Tyler showed that there was, at that stage, only a couple of millimetres of this material across Pedder Beach. It wasn't even enough to fill in the tyre tracks of the last aircraft to land on the beach, which were all still visible. And so there's absolutely no reason why it's not restorable. Now, this was the conclusion drawn by the Federal Parliamentary Inquiry, and there's been no reason to come to any other conclusion. I mean, that inquiry said that restoration was totally feasible. It was a question of political will and finance. Well, now we have a situation where anybody with 1 ounce of political wit, let alone political will, wouldn't choose to spend twice the cost of flooding Lake Pedder on doing it a second time round.
The first time we moved to save Lake Pedder, of course out came the vested interests and even some befuddled scientists saying, oh no, you can't do that. Even, remarkably, it'd be bad for the platypus to restore their natural habitat. And of course that got headlines, ludicrous as it was.
It was an excellent inquiry, but again, that evidence was given in that inquiry to suggest the platypus would die on the basis of no science at all.
This time, we've got the science with us, we've got the economics with us, and we've got the ecology to show people what a wonder it will be, not just for nature, but for us as a society when we restore Lake Pedder.
Well, some of my students are working towards restoring Lake Pedder, yes. Just recently, people like Tobias, Burrows and others.
Now bunyip with gabbing claws. Yeah, we're just discovering the thylacine out here, it's all good. There's the possibility of restoring something that my generation, Tabatha and Jimmy's generation, never got to experience. And there's a tangible pathway, and the science is there, and the drive is there, and the will is there to pull this thing across the line And it's something that can be given back to future generations, so it's definitely a worthwhile pursuit. I've been involved in numerous species surveys and bioblitzes over the time, and also raising awareness to people that have no idea that the original Lake Pedder sits just beyond these narrows in a watery prison.
There's this emerging concept of ecological amnesia or biological amnesia, and it's just essentially as each year and each generation goes on, the impacts that we're feeling and seeing is that loss of ecosystem process and that loss of ecosystem integrity. And I think a spectacular antidote to amnesia is the act of restoration. And just the idea alone of knowing that once the impoundment is removed and the dams are removed and the processes return, is that I might be lucky to experience that Serpentine River and the button grass plains and the lake return. And it's a very wholesome thought.
My relationship with Lake Pedder goes back quite a long way, my whole life really. But I'm so impressed with the generation of young activists that are coming through who are getting on board with the campaign to restore Lake Pedder and reclaim it. There's a lot of momentum growing for this campaign from people of all ages, and that's very exciting because it belongs to all of us.
I'm Tabatha Badger, the Restore Pedder campaign coordinator, and I'm here with an amazing group of young activists. Over the side of the original Lake Pedder, we are calling for its restoration. The flooding of Lake Pedder was pivotal. It started a global conservation movement. Now, amid a climate and biodiversity crisis, we need to turn the tide on destruction, and it starts with the restoration of Lake Pedder in Tasmania's Wilderness World Heritage Area. Restore Pedder!
Crucial to any campaign is the artists and being willing to get creative.
Oh, well, I had an idea before I went there, and I followed through with that. I took with me many red buckets. I sort of envisaged this idea of the desire to drain it. You know, when you just go, what do we want? We just want to drain it. I knew when I got there, I would feel like, where is the plug? Hopefully this will be returned to what it should be, what it is, what it's waiting. It's sort of sleeping waters waiting to be back to being country. Let's attend to what's been damaged and try to return it, because, you know, the plants and the animals are waiting. Everything is waiting to return and embrace, and that's our people as well, like to walk the ways that should be walked. I think we all have to wake up, you know, wake up for the future, for next generations and for the well-being of the island, and go, no, this has had its day. Yeah, and it's well past due that we give it a chance to live again.
Greatest benefit of restoring Pedder, I think, is symbolic in turning around the destruction of the planet and restoring something of great value, of great aesthetic value and a great biological value.
It feels like a matter of time until the unfinished business is done. The dams come down and the lake is restored, and also the wetland system is restored, and the rivers that run from this watershed. You know, the health of those rivers is really interrupted by this impoundment. So it feels like a very positive step 50 years on from the original damming, with dams that are now outdated, requiring massive budgets to maintain in the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration. It seems really logical. And renewable energy has taken leaps and bounds in 50 years. So the capacity to produce renewable energy has expanded exponentially. So it's time to take down the dams, redirect the maintenance budget, and free up Lake Pedder. Let's do it.
What would it mean on the day that Lake Pedder is restored?
Yeah.
Jubilance. I would be absolutely, exuberantly, joyfully cartwheeling across the beach.
It's going to be the validation of the hard work and the effort of many, many, many people that have put their time into this campaign.
I see it as an enormous symbol of hope. It puts it up there as a beacon, just exactly as Alagus Truchanas said all those years ago, that Tasmania can be a beacon.
It's not the destination, it's the journey. And like personally, the amount of folk that I've met that are very passionate and dedicated to this beautiful place in the world, like that alone is pretty bloody special. It's a place that people keep coming back to time and time again, and always will. I feel kind of lucky to be part of it, really.
Yeah, I suspect I'll be dead, but then I've been thinking that for the last 30 years that I've fallen off or something by then. I think Pedder restored would be a really monumental beacon of hope in a world that's having too many candles snuffed out. It's a place that just would... I'm out of words, sorry. I can't get there. There's no words for it. There's just no words for how important I think it would be to get Pedder back. And there'll be plenty of people who say, oh, we've got all these other problems that we need to deal with, and I totally accept there's a lot of really severe problems. We shouldn't be incapable of thinking about any more than one issue.
It's costless in terms of human endeavour. You've just got to remove a plug or two. And it's a balm for the soul of a very anxious world. It's a gift to all of us to be able to be part of restoring that beautiful lake.